In 2010, Britain sold its fighter jets, not to an enemy, to its closest ally. The United States Marine Corps bought the Royal Navy's Harriers, the planes that had punched well above their weight in the Falklands, for spare parts. And the carrier that flew them, sent to the breakers. The obituaries practically wrote themselves. For the next decade, every serious analyst, every rival defense ministry, every NATO budget meeting quietly arrived at the same conclusion. Britain had made its choice. It had chosen comfort over power, history over relevance. It would remain respected, the way you respect an old general who no longer commands anything. What nobody realized, not Moscow, not Beijing, not even most of Washington, was that Britain had made a completely different choice. Not retreat, recalculation. While the world was busy burying it, something was being assembled in classified shipyards, anonymous laboratories, and defense offices that don't appear on any public map, quietly, deliberately, with the kind of patience that only a country that has survived plague, invasion, and 2 world wars actually possesses. What emerged was not a restoration of the old empire. It was something the world had never seen from Britain before. And when it finally stepped back into the light, the shock was total. This is how it happened. To understand what Britain built, you first have to understand exactly how far it fell. Because the distance matters. The depth of the wound tells you everything about the scale of what came after. The Cold War ended in 1989 with champagne, speeches, and the intoxicating feeling that the hard part was finally over. The Berlin Wall came down. The Soviet threat, the one that had defined Western military strategy for 40 years, that had kept a generation of British soldiers, sailors, and airmen on permanent readiness, dissolved practically overnight. And Western governments, drunk on victory, reached for what economists called the peace dividend, as if history owed them a refund. Britain reached harder than most. The cuts that followed weren't surgical. They were sweeping. Between 1990 and the mid-2000s, the British military was systematically taken apart, not destroyed in battle, not outmaneuvered by a rival, but dismantled by spreadsheet, by men in suits, sitting in rooms far from any battlefield, deciding that the danger had passed and the money was needed elsewhere. Defense spending fell from 4.1% of GDP in the late 1980s to below 2% by the early 2010s. To understand what that number means in practice, consider this: 33 brand new Tornado jets were scrapped before they ever flew an operational mission. 33 aircraft, already built, already paid for, destroyed because maintaining them cost money that nobody wanted to spend. The British Army shrank to 116,000 troops, its smallest size since before the Battle of Waterloo. Not since Napoleon had stood on the French coast looking north had Britain fielded an army this thin. Entire regiments, with centuries of battle honors and institutional memory bought through blood, were dissolved, not on some distant battlefield, in a moment of glory, in budget meetings, with a signature on a form. The Royal Navy, the force that had ruled the world's oceans for 3 centuries, the fleet that had broken the Spanish Armada, defeated Napoleon at Trafalgar, and kept the Atlantic open when Hitler tried to close it, was hollowed out ship by ship. Decommissioning ceremonies became routine, too routine. And then came the moment that crystallized everything. The single image that said more than any government review ever could. HMS Ark Royal, one of Britain's proudest warships, was sent to the breakers, and her Harrier jets, the aircraft that had achieved the near impossible in the South Atlantic, that had flown outnumbered against Argentine mirages and come back, were loaded onto American transport aircraft and flown to the United States. Britain had sold its warplanes to its closest ally because it could no longer afford to fly them. In Whitehall, the civil servants called it strategic adjustment. On the parade grounds, they called it something else entirely. But the damage went deeper than numbers and ships and jets. The damage was psychological, because a military isn't just equipment. It's a belief system. It's the institutional conviction that what you do matters, that the investment society makes in you has purpose. Strip that away, year after year, cut after cut, announcement after announcement about what's being retired and disbanded, and downsized. And you don't just weaken a force, you break something inside it. A generation of British officers entered service in the 1990s and early 2000s and found themselves commanding under-equipped units on overstretched missions. In Afghanistan, a war that lasted 20 years and cost Britain 457 lives, soldiers were sometimes issued body armor that had been designed for a previous generation of threats. Helicopters were in chronic short supply. Armored vehicles designed for the Cold War's European plains were being driven down roads in Helmand Province, where the real threat came from bombs buried in the dirt. These were not failures of courage. The British soldier has never lacked for that. These were failures of investment, of political will, of a governing class that had convinced itself that the era of serious conflict was simply over. By 2017, the question that nobody wanted to ask out loud was being asked everywhere. Does Britain still matter? For the first time in modern history, the country that had invented the global balance of power, that had written the rules of naval dominance, that had built and lost an empire spanning a quarter of the earth, appeared to be watching the world from the sidelines. But here's what every rival, every analyst, every comfortable voice writing Britain's epitaph failed to understand. Sidelines are temporary, and the English Channel is a very short distance from the center of everything. It didn't start with a press conference. There was no Rose Garden moment, no prime ministerial declaration that Britain was back. That is not how serious strategic shifts happen. Serious strategic shifts happen in documents that are never fully published, in conversations that are never transcribed, and in budget lines buried so deep inside defense reviews that journalists give up looking for them. Somewhere around 2015, inside one of those quiet rooms, a question was asked, a very specific, very dangerous question. What does a country that cannot outspend China, cannot outman Russia, and cannot outproduce the United States do to remain not just relevant, but feared? The answer, it turned out, was not to copy any of them. It was to become something none of them were. Because Britain possessed assets that its rivals consistently undervalued. Not size, not raw budget, not the kind of brute industrial capacity that churns out tanks by the thousand. What Britain had was a network, the deepest, most trusted, most operationally proven intelligence and defense network in the world. The Five Eyes Alliance, Britain, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, sharing signals intelligence at a level of integration no other group of nations has ever replicated. The NATO relationships built over 70 years of genuine interoperability, Commonwealth ties that gave British forces access, basing rights, and operational understanding in regions where other Western militaries arrived as strangers. Britain also had something harder to quantify, but impossible to replace: engineering credibility. Rolls-Royce builds jet engines that power aircraft on 6 continents. BAE Systems designs warships that Allied navies line up to buy. The defense industry that the budget cuts had wounded was not dead. It was waiting for a signal. The signal came quietly, in the form of redirected investment, not into numbers, not into mass, but into edge, into the technologies that would define the next generation of warfare, before that generation had even arrived. And simultaneously, Britain began doing something that empires almost never do gracefully. It accepted the limits of what it was, and designed a strategy around those limits, rather than pretending they didn't exist. Smaller than before, yes, but faster, more networked, more precise, capable of punching so far above its numerical weight that the weight itself became almost irrelevant. The revolution was quiet because it had to be. In an era of budget scrutiny and political volatility, announcing a military renaissance invites both public skepticism and adversarial attention. Better to build first, announce later. Let the results speak. They are speaking now. Let's start with the sky, because that is where Britain made its boldest statement. In 2018, the concept of Tempest was unveiled at the Farnborough Air Show, a 6th-generation combat aircraft unlike anything Britain had attempted since the Cold War. The reaction was mixed. Admiration, certainly, but also quiet skepticism. Could Britain actually deliver something this ambitious? Or was this another elegant vision that would eventually be quietly filed away when the money ran out? The answer came in 2022, when Tempest evolved into the Global Combat Air Program, GCAP, a full trilateral development partnership between the United Kingdom, Japan, and Italy, 3 nations with serious aerospace industries, serious defense budgets, and a shared strategic interest in not being dependent on American or European fighter programs for the next 50 years. This is not a paper concept. This is not a PowerPoint ambition shown to investors to generate enthusiasm. This is an active, funded, internationally binding program with work-share agreements, prototype timelines, and test schedules. By 2026, active prototyping is underway. The aircraft is being built, and what an aircraft it is designed to be. GCAP will be capable of autonomous operations, flying with unmanned drone wingmen that it commands in real time, extending its sensory reach and strike capacity far beyond what any single crewed aircraft could achieve alone. Its stealth architecture will make it nearly invisible to the radar systems that exist today, let alone the ones that will exist when it enters service. Its Rolls-Royce adaptive cycle engine will modify its own performance profile in flight, more thrust for combat, better fuel efficiency for range, adjusting dynamically to whatever the mission demands. Its onboard AI will process battlespace data faster than any human pilot ever could, presenting commanders with fused intelligence from satellites, ships, cyber networks, and allied aircraft simultaneously. And here's the detail that matters most politically. While Britain and its partners are building this aircraft, Europe's rival 6th generation program, the Franco-German Future Combat Air System, or FCAS, remains paralyzed. Dassault and Airbus have spent years arguing over intellectual property rights, work-share percentages, and program leadership. As of 2026, those disputes remain unresolved. The aircraft that was supposed to cement French and German air dominance in Europe exists primarily as a diplomatic problem and a set of competing ambitions. Britain's aircraft is being built. Europe's is still being negotiated. Now go to sea. The Type 26 City-class frigate represents everything Britain's naval renaissance stands for. These are not general-purpose warships. They are specialist submarine hunters, built around a single mission that has become the most important mission in the North Atlantic. Finding and tracking Russian nuclear submarines before those submarines can do anything the West would prefer, they didn't. The Type 26's hull is engineered from the keel upward to minimize acoustic signature, the vibrations and sounds that sonar systems use to detect a ship's presence. It is one of the quietest, large warships ever constructed. Its towed array sonar can detect submarines at ranges that would have seemed almost fantastical a generation ago. It carries a Merlin helicopter, capable of extending its submarine hunting reach across enormous areas of ocean. Its vertical launch systems can fire a range of missiles for different threats. It is modular, reconfigurable for different mission types without fundamental redesign. Canada signed a contract to build 15 Type 26 variants. Australia signed for 9. These are not courtesy purchases from a friendly ally. When nations spend billions of dollars building someone else's warship design, it means they looked at everything available in the world market and decided that this one was the best. Britain's frigate won on merit. The Type 31 Inspiration-class frigate was built on a different philosophy, where the Type 26 is deep and specialized. The Type 31 is broad and adaptable, designed to be produced quickly and affordably, to show the flag in regions where Britain needs presence, rather than overwhelming firepower, to be configurable for different mission sets, and to be competitive on the global export market. Britain has thought carefully about what a modern mid-tier warship should look like in a world of proliferating threats and constrained budgets, and the Type 31 is the answer. Then there is Dragonfire. For decades, directed energy weapons, lasers powerful enough to destroy targets in combat, existed at the intersection of science fiction and defense industry optimism. Programs were started, money was spent, results were disappointing. The technology kept promising more than it delivered. In 2024, Britain's Ministry of Defense announced publicly what insiders had known was coming. Dragonfire had successfully destroyed fast-moving aerial targets in live field testing, not simulations, not laboratory conditions, real targets, real results, in conditions approximating actual operational use. Dragonfire fires a beam of coherent light intense enough to burn through a drone's airframe within seconds of contact. It can engage multiple targets in rapid succession. It doesn't run out of ammunition. As long as the ship or vehicle it's mounted on has electrical power, it can fire, and the cost per engagement is measured measured in single-digit British pounds. Compare that to the cost of even a basic surface-to-air missile, typically tens of thousands of pounds, and the economic logic becomes immediately obvious. In a world where drone swarm attacks have become a genuine tactical reality, where a single naval vessel might face dozens of cheap unmanned aircraft simultaneously, a weapon that costs almost nothing per shot and can engage targets faster than any missile system is not merely useful. It is potentially decisive. Britain didn't announce Dragonfire to generate headlines. It announced it because it works. Now go deeper, much deeper. Beneath the world's oceans, at any given moment, at least one British nuclear-armed submarine is on patrol, silent, undetectable by any technology a potential adversary currently possesses, armed with Trident II D5 ballistic missiles, each one capable of carrying multiple independently targetable warheads across intercontinental ranges with a margin of accuracy measured in meters. This is called the continuous at-sea deterrent. Britain has maintained it without interruption since April 1969, through recessions that collapsed governments, through the end of the Cold War, through a decade of brutal defense cuts, through a global pandemic that stopped almost every other form of normal life on Earth, through 2 decades of austerity, through Brexit and its chaos. Through all of it, one submarine has always been somewhere beneath the ocean's surface, always armed, always ready. That consistency is not an accident. It is a choice, made and remade every day, that says, whatever else changes, this does not. It is Britain's ultimate answer to the question of whether it remains serious about its own survival. The Vanguard-class submarines that have carried this mission since the 1990s are now being replaced. In the shipyards at Barrow-in-Furness, a town on the edge of the English Lake District that has been building submarines for Britain since before the First World War, the Dreadnought class is taking shape. These vessels will integrate quantum navigation systems that function without GPS signals, because GPS can be jammed and quantum navigation cannot. They will carry AI-assisted threat analysis systems. They will incorporate electronic signature suppression that makes even allied navies struggle to track them during joint exercises. The dreadnoughts are not just weapons. They are a philosophical statement, a declaration that certain things remain beyond the reach of cyber attacks, electronic warfare, and the relentless ingenuity of adversaries who would prefer Britain unarmed, unhackable, unblockable, the final guarantee. Then came AUKUS, announced in September 2021 and still reverberating in strategic circles 5 years later. The partnership between Britain, the United States, and Australia was, at its surface level, a deal to provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. But its implications ran far deeper than any single shipbuilding contract. AUKUS was the moment Britain embedded itself permanently into the architecture of Indo-Pacific security. It was the moment London declared, formally, irreversibly, with Washington's explicit backing, that British strategic interests now extended from the Atlantic to the South China Sea. For Beijing, this was not an inconvenience. Beijing's military planners understand exactly what it means when 3 advanced naval powers formalize a submarine technology partnership specifically designed to complicate China's ability to project power across its own strategic neighborhood. It means the neighborhood just became considerably more contested. For Britain, AUKUS was something even more important, proof that the special relationship with the United States had not merely survived Brexit and austerity and every question about British relevance, it had deepened. That is not nothing. In a world of transactional alliances and shifting commitments, a partnership that deepens under pressure is one of the most valuable strategic assets a nation can possess. Here is where the story stops being about hardware and starts being about will, because capability without deployment is just expensive metal. What Britain demonstrated, and what its rivals found genuinely surprising, was the willingness to actually use what it had built. In 2023, the Royal Marines opened Camp Viking in Norway, a permanent Arctic forward operating base, carved out of one of the harshest environments on Earth, positioned deliberately on NATO's northern flank. The Arctic is not a sideshow. It is the fastest growing strategic corridor on the planet. As ice retreats, new shipping routes open, new resource deposits become accessible, and new military approaches to both Russia and NATO territory become viable. Russia has understood this for years. It has rebuilt its Arctic military infrastructure extensively since 2014, reopening Soviet-era bases, deploying specialized Arctic ground forces, conducting submarine operations in the Barents Sea, that consistently test NATO's detection and response capabilities. Britain, with Camp Viking, said, "We see what you're doing up there, and we're up there too." The symbolism was immediate. After decades of retreating from forward positions, Britain was building new ones, not temporary exercises, permanent infrastructure, a footprint in the Arctic that will outlast any single government or defense review. And then there was the South China Sea. When HMS Queen Elizabeth led her carrier strike group through those waters in 2021, the reaction in Western capitals ranged from admiration to visible relief. Post-Brexit Britain had been accused, often loudly, of turning inward, of retreating from global commitments to manage a difficult divorce from its European neighbors. The narrative wrote itself, a smaller, meaner Britain, focused on trade deals and border controls, leaving the heavy lifting of global security to others. The carrier strike group destroyed that narrative in a single deployment. Flanked by a Type 45 destroyer, a Type 23 frigate, a nuclear submarine running silently beneath the surface, and ships from the United States Navy and the Royal Netherlands Navy, HMS Queen Elizabeth sailed through some of the most contested waters on Earth. Her F-35B stealth fighters conducted operations alongside aircraft from Japan, the United States, and Australia. The group passed within operational range of the island chains that Beijing claims as sovereign territory and that most of the rest of the world considers international waters. Beijing filed diplomatic protests. The strike group continued its mission. That sequence, protest, continue, is the entire point. Presence is only meaningful if it is maintained under pressure. The moment a naval force reroutes to avoid a diplomatic complaint, it has conceded something that is very difficult to reclaim. Britain did not reroute. When Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022, Britain's response was immediate, in a way that exposed the gap between those who had maintained readiness and those who had let it atrophy. NLAW anti-tank missiles, a jointly developed British-Swedish weapon, had already been pre-positioned and delivered to Ukrainian forces weeks before the invasion began. British intelligence assessments had been specific about both the timing and scale of what was coming, and the government had acted on those assessments rather than hoping the analysts were wrong. In the months that followed, Britain provided Ukraine with artillery systems and the ammunition to sustain them, with radar systems to detect incoming strikes before they hit, and eventually, in 2023, with Storm Shadow cruise missiles, a weapon with a range exceeding 250 kilometers, and a precision guidance system capable of striking specific rooms within specific buildings. Ukrainian forces used them. Russian command infrastructure deep behind the front lines, infrastructure that had previously considered itself safely out of range, found that the range had changed. The results were documented. The strategic effect was real. Germany would eventually contribute. France would eventually contribute. The European Union would eventually find a mechanism for coordinating defense procurement at scale. But by the time those contributions arrived, Britain had already been in Ukraine's corner for over a year. When the moment of existential crisis arrived, Britain moved. That is what allies remember. The most consequential battlefield Britain now operates on cannot be seen, photographed, or visited by a journalist. In 2020, the National Cyber Force was established, a joint command fusing GCHQ, one of the most capable signals intelligence agencies ever built, with the operational infrastructure of the Ministry of Defense. This was not merely an organizational change, it was a transformation of how Britain thinks about conflict. For the first time, the people who break codes, intercept communications, and map adversary networks were formally joined with the people who plan and execute military operations. The result is an offensive cyber capability that can reach into adversary systems, military command networks, logistics databases, air defense infrastructure, communication satellites, and manipulate, disrupt, or destroy what it finds there, quietly, without attribution, with a precision that conventional weapons cannot match. In exercises, British cyber units have demonstrated the ability to sever communication links between enemy commanders and their frontline units at precisely the moment those links matter most, to inject false information into logistics systems, making an adversary's supply chain invisible to its own operators, to blind integrated air defense networks before a single aircraft takes off. These are not theoretical capabilities. They have been tested. They work. Electromagnetic warfare complements the cyber capability. Britain's new Cyber and Electromagnetic Activity Command, CEMA, integrates radar deception, communications jamming, and AI-driven electronic suppression into a single operational concept. The aim is to enter any contested environment having already degraded the adversary's ability to see, communicate, and respond before the conventional forces arrive. It is, in the oldest military sense, the art of creating fog. But now the fog is engineered digitally, deployed remotely, and far more disorienting than anything gunpowder ever produced. And then there are the ghosts. The SAS and the Special Boat Service, Britain's special forces, have not had a quiet decade. Their missions are rarely acknowledged and almost never discussed publicly, but they have been operating continuously across Syria, Iraq, the Sahel, Eastern Europe, and other theaters that British officials decline to specify. They are not a relic of Cold War-era commando mythology. They are a functioning operational instrument of British foreign policy in every region where overt military presence would be politically impossible or strategically counterproductive. What distinguishes modern British special forces from their predecessors is not courage. That was never in question, but integration. An SAS team deployed in a remote region today operates with real-time access to satellite imagery, AI-assisted targeting recommendations, drone feeds from multiple platforms, and direct communication lines to cyber units that can suppress adversary communications or intercept their transmissions on demand. The lone patrol behind enemy lines of Second World War legend has evolved into a node in a networked killing machine that stretches from the ground to orbit and from kinetic strike to digital sabotage. They are, by any honest assessment, among the most capable special operations forces on Earth, and they have never stopped working. Let's now have an honest conversation about what all of this means for Europe. Because the implications are significant, and they are not comfortable for some of Britain's oldest rivals. Germany possesses Europe's largest economy. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine shocked Berlin out of decades of strategic self-satisfaction, Chancellor Scholz announced the Zeitenwende, the Great Turning Point, and a €100 billion special defense fund to begin rebuilding the Bundeswehr into something that matched Germany's economic weight. The intention was serious. The execution was not, at least not yet. Internal Bundeswehr audits published in 2024 and 2025 revealed a military still struggling with the consequences of 30 years of chronic underfunding. A significant percentage of Germany's armored vehicle fleet was non-operational due to maintenance backlogs and spare parts shortages. Eurofighter jets were grounded for weeks at a time, waiting for components. The Bundeswehr's ability to rapidly deploy a formed, combat-ready force to NATO's eastern flank remained measurably and significantly below what Germany's public commitments to the alliance suggested it should be. Germany is a serious country with serious institutions and serious engineers. It will, eventually, rebuild its military into something commensurate with its economic and political weight, but eventually is not now. And in the gap between Germany's ambitions and Germany's current capabilities, Britain operates. France is a more genuinely capable military power and should never be casually dismissed. It maintains its own independent nuclear deterrent. It has an aircraft carrier, special forces with real operational experience, and a history of willingness to use military force when French interests require it. French military culture takes deterrence and power projection seriously in ways that much of continental Europe does not. But even France finds itself looking at Britain with newly complicated eyes. France has one aircraft carrier. Britain has two. France's nuclear submarines conduct regional patrols. Britons operate globally under AUKUS commitments and NATO tasking. In the race to sixth-generation aviation, France's FCAS program remains bogged down in the corporate politics of workshare and leadership between Dassault and Airbus. Britain's GCAP partnership has a clear governance structure, active prototyping, and 3 committed national industrial bases pulling in the same direction. In arms exports, one of the clearest measures of military industrial credibility, because foreign governments spend real money and take real defense decisions based on what they trust, Britain has climbed to Europe's top position. Type 26 frigate contracts in Canada and Australia, growing demand for British radar, engine, and missile systems across the Commonwealth and beyond. When nations choose whose technology to trust with their national security, they are making a judgment about quality, reliability, and long-term partnership. Britain is winning that judgment. Within NATO, Britain's role has become foundational in a way that exceeds its size. In every major NATO deployment, the enhanced forward presence in Estonia, aerial policing operations in Eastern Europe, maritime patrols in the North Atlantic, British forces are among the first committed and the last withdrawn. Britain consistently meets or exceeds the NATO target of spending 2% of GDP on defense, and the government's commitment to reaching 2.5% by the late 2020s represents a genuine and substantial increase in real terms. It hosts American forces and intelligence infrastructure. It leads the Joint Expeditionary Force, a 10-nation coalition capable of rapid deployment without the procedural delays inherent in EU decision-making. When Washington needs a European partner willing to share political risk as well as military capability, the call goes to London first. This is not nostalgia for a relationship built in the Second World War. This is modern strategic practicality. Britain acts at a speed that most multilateral structures cannot match. It makes decisions. It executes them in a security environment that rewards decisiveness and punishes paralysis. That quality is worth more than raw numbers. Nobody serious in Britain is arguing otherwise. The flags have come down. The territories returned. The era when a small island off the northwestern edge of Europe governed a quarter of the human race through a combination of naval supremacy, commercial dominance, and sheer institutional confidence. That era is in the history books, where it belongs. What Britain built in its place took decades to understand, including by Britain itself. It is not an empire rebuilt. It is something more adaptive and, in many ways, more durable. A precision instrument of strategic power, engineered not for the world that existed in 1900 or even 1945, but for the world as it actually is, contested, networked, technologically driven, and deeply uncomfortable with the kind of mass industrial warfare that decided the great conflicts of the 20th century. Britain is the lead partner in the world's most advanced sixth-generation fighter program, pulling ahead of every European rival. It has put laser weapons into operational testing when others were still debating feasibility. It has maintained an unbroken nuclear deterrent at sea for over 50 years, a record of consistency that no other nation in the world has matched. It has built 2 aircraft carriers that deploy to the waters that matter most, commanded by the officers that matter most, carrying the aircraft that define the cutting edge of strike aviation. It has created a cyber warfare capability that can blind adversary defenses before a conventional weapon is ever fired. Its special forces have never stopped working in every theater where the West's interests required quiet, precise, deniable action. And it has done all of this while navigating austerity, political turmoil, a historic departure from its largest trading bloc, and the relentless skepticism of analysts who had already decided the story was over. The countries that wrote Britain's obituary, that assumed post-empire, post-Brexit, post-austerity, Britain would gradually, gracefully, and permanently recede from the first tier of military powers, have received their answer. Britain was never fading. It was sharpening. It was waiting, with the particular patience of a nation that has been underestimated before and knows exactly how that story ends. In 2026, the edge is fully visible. The world noticed. It always does. Just never quite when Britain plans it to.